Welcome to the Concussion Fix Podcast, where we lift the veil on concussion recovery and empower you with real answers to real questions about persistent concussion symptoms.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Concussion Fix Podcast. We just finished our Q&A and we had a great question that we do get asked a lot with a lot of members who are worried about if their brain is permanently damaged. So this member, it was around numbers. They couldn't copy numbers in the right order from one document to another. We have questions a lot of times too about words, reading, writing, even talking. The words are in opposite ends of the sentence or just out of order, so it doesn't really flow properly. And that brings a lot of worry for our members. Is their brain permanently damaged is a lot of times what they think and what they fear, that cognitive ability and rehab that we talk about a lot. So maybe I'll switch it over to Dr. Marshall to start.
Yeah, so this particular individual, I believe she said she was an accountant or a bookkeeper or something. So she's obviously familiar with numbers. Numbers are her life. She suggested that being able to copy numbers down and transfer them from one document to another was kind of her superpower. And now she's noticing that she's not able to do that. She's mixing things up. She's mixing up the sequence. She's getting the numbers wrong. And she also noticed that the cells in Excel tended to like move around on her, like she wasn't able to properly, gather them. And so the first thing that I brought up when it comes to any cognitive difficulty like this, cognitive issues are related to all the other symptoms that people are experiencing. For example, we cannot concentrate well cognitively if we are in pain. If we have a headache, we can't focus very well. We cannot read and interpret things properly if our eyes are moving all over the place and we're not able to smoothly visualize the numbers that we're looking at. Because if our eyes are jumping all over the page, then we're going to read those numbers potentially out of order. Now, they might interpret that as a cognitive problem. Oh, my brain isn't able to like remember these numbers, but it may be that they're actually remembering them, but they're not seeing them in the right order because their eyes are moving all over the place. The other major contributor to any type of cognitive problem, the number one thing that we see in the research is related to anxiety and depression. We cannot think clearly if our mind is swirling about a whole bunch of other things. And then the other problem is that the way that we internalize that problem, if this person says, this was my superpower, and they notice a little bit of difficulty with it, they're then going to, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where they start to say, oh, I've had problems with this in the past. Oh my God, I'm still having problems with this. And then just thinking that is going to create the problem or make the problem seem much more distressing, which then compounds it and actually makes it worse and so on and so on. So they start to kind of notice it more and more and more and more and more, and then they pathologize it. It's now a problem. So what I described to this particular individual is that if you look at the concussion recovery pyramid and how we base our concussion recovery process on, cognitive dysfunction is the very last step because it's tied to everything else. So if you have autonomic dysregulation, your cognitive function is going to be impaired. If you have issues with anxiety and depression, mental health, your cognitive function is going to be impaired. If you have visual processing issues, your cognitive function is going to be impaired. If you have inflammation, your brain is not going to work as well because it's inflamed. You're kind of thinking through mud. You're not able to actually think clearly because of all that fogginess going on due to the inflammatory components. So the way to address cognitive issues is to address all the underlying dysfunctions first. If you still have other symptoms, if you still feel dizzy, if you still have visual problems, if you still have headaches, if you still have pain, if you're still not sleeping well, if you haven't dialed in your diet or balanced your autonomics, if you still can't fully exert yourself without having symptoms, that shows you there's a dysfunction. All of those dysfunctions are going to contribute to cognitive problems. So the question for her was, what can I do about this specific issue I have with numbers? And my answer was, fix all the underlying stuff. and usually the cognitive problem will go away all on its own. But if you get through and you fixed all those other issues and you don't have any other symptoms, but you still have this one little cognitive lingering piece, now you can start looking at, okay, what specific rehab exercises can I do? Can I go to an occupational therapist or a speech language pathologist or somebody to help me with this specific thing? Um, and that's kind of the way to approach any cognitive difficulty is fixing the other things which are likely causing that cognitive problem. Because if your issue, let's say, is autonomic, no amount of cognitive rehab is going to help that. You have to fix the autonomic issue. If your issue is inflammation, cognitive rehab is only going to get you so far. You're going to have to go and fix the inflammation. So the way that we think about it is fix the underlying systems, and 99% of the time, the cognitive issue is going to dissipate all on its own. If it doesn't, and that's your one lingering issue, now you can start looking at structured rehabilitation approaches for that particular item. Anyone else have anything to contribute?
Dr. Hrkal, do you have a point that you wanted to make?
Well, I think that Cam, you covered it. I mean, basically, the approach after a concussion that everyone is so scared about is that I think I've hurt my brain. I can't think anymore clearly. I have brain fog. I'm confused. I have memory issues. My brain is broken, and then they start going down the neurology train. So check these underlying issues off, and I kind of describe it like a processing software problem in my patients where if you do an update and we make sure that all these software are softwares that you have in your brain, that is your visual system, your balance and vestibular system, your hormonal system, all these systems are calibrated properly or communicating to each other, then your brain's going to function optimally. And 9 out of 10 times, it's to do with these underlying things. And I think this is a perfect segue to get your opinion, Melinda, because I really see a huge connection with anxiety and nervousness and nervous system hyperstimulation when it comes to what people would describe as cognitive dysfunction and confusion and memory issues.
Yeah, I mean, as Dr. Cam sort of highlighted, this link in the literature to anxiety and depression is a huge one, and it's so much more than that. I find when we say sort of anxiety and depression, everyone gets lost. Well, what does that mean? So what it means is when you have concussion, you've had prolonged symptoms, you've developed PCS, there's so much more going on underneath the surface, right? You're starting to panic, you're fearful, you're wondering whether you're going to get your life back. You start really ruminating about things. Maybe you can't do the things you used to. In this case, in particular, this woman wasn't able to do her superpower, right? That's a direct threat to your identity, who you are as a person, how you show up in the world. All these things are so interconnected with how we're able to function. And so it makes sense that our cognitive function can be impaired when we have a lot of these underlying things going on. So it's sort of one of these things that can take a while to sort of unpack all of the other sort of surrounding challenges that, or I should say, underlying dysfunctions that Dr. Marshall highlighted is certainly part of the picture as well. And, this kind of just comes back to our concussion fix pyramid, where we talk about what is something that we can work with now that's directly related to or can be directly supported today. And that's sort of trying to understand whether there's any kind of fear, anxiety, panic, mood component that's impacting this struggle. So, for example, you're noticing these challenges. If you pause, and I'm using an example Nikki had shared with us earlier, if you were to pause and take 3 slow breaths, right? Settle your system, maybe even put your hand on your lower belly, take 3 in breaths, breathing in for 4 and out for 4, doing 3 rounds of that, and then seeing whether or not you can initiate a conversation, if you can write those numbers properly, following a brief grounding exercise, right? Grounding, stabilizing our nervous system, right? There's so many little tips and tricks, and we have hundreds of them in the program that we offer people to sort of start regulating their nervous system, to feel a little bit more grounded and stable in their emotions, to regulate that way. That enables someone to move from this sort of nervous system a heightened nervous system experience, whether that's fight, flight, or freeze response, into regulation so that you can start thinking clearly, focusing, moving from one thing to the next, or whatever it is that you needed to do, speaking clearly. Right? You think about panic disorder, for example, and fear of public speaking. Well, what happens when somebody goes up that has panic disorder and is fearful of public speaking? They can't get their words out, right? They have cognitive dysfunction, right? This is very common. It's not something that is only specific to concussion or post-concussion, right? When we choke up, when we get overwhelmed, when we're worried, when we're anxious, we can't think clearly, we can't speak clearly. Everything becomes impaired in that way. So I always offer, when I'm working with clients one-on-one in this regard, I always offer to run experiments, right? Test certain regulation techniques, emotional regulation, nervous system regulation techniques. They're really brief strategies, like a deep breath in for 4 and hum for 6 counts on the out breath. Do that for 5 minutes and then see where your nervous system is at if you can do that task you were trying to do. Right? This is a way to sort of test and evaluate whether or not um, having nervous system dysregulation or something like anxiety, panic, depression is part of your picture, right? And again, there's so much underneath that layer. We're using sort of these broader labels because that's what we do to sort of like try to help make sense of it. But don't be scared by that label of anxiety and depression. It really is nervous system dysregulation, right? A lot of threats to who we are, how we believe we need to show up in the world, how we fulfill our roles and responsibilities and duties in our life. These are all threats to our safety, which comes back to that nervous system piece. So I always offer that, just to repeat there. What are some tests you can run to see whether or not if you can regulate your nervous system, if that cognitive clarity comes back? If yes, great. You've got a little bit of your own superpower there as far as how you can start supporting that. If not, that's okay, right? These strategies are still going to help create a baseline of safety and regulation so that as you continue to move through the program, and perhaps, I know Cam's already mentioned this, like maybe you have an autonomic dysfunction, maybe you have a visual or vestibular dysfunction, or any of these underlying systems that might be dysregulated, you're going to be able to move into working through those with a clear mindset and a more of an ability to take that on versus when it's muddled by nervous system and mood dysregulation. Kind of a long-winded answer, but happy for any of you to comment on that.
Well, I always use this example, but I have a stutter, but nobody would know it because I hide it well. Um, but usually it comes out when I'm nervous. And so I do a lot of speaking engagements. And if I look out and there's a big crowd there and I'm like, before I go on, it's like I'm jittery and I know that I'm gonna screw up some words when I first get out there. And I do it every time. It doesn't matter. It's one of those things I've done it so many times, but you still get nervous for it going up in front of a crowd of people or whatever. And that's typically when you're going to see that, that overwhelm or that catch that happens. So it's, that's kind of how I've
Yeah.
described it in the past to other people. It's like these things tend to show up when we're in a state of, arousal or anxiety.
Yes. Yeah. And then do you have little like tips or tricks for yourself that you do to sort of regulate in that moment before you start speaking? Or is it sort of like exposure? The more you do it, it just kind of settles on its own. Right? There's
Well,
always little things.
I think it's exposure, because the more I do it, the less it's there. But you can also feel it kind of coming on, and certain words or certain like sounds. Like I frequently have difficulty with your name, Melinda. See, I just Melinda. It's just certain word, and so what I'll do is I'll just quickly think of a different word to say because I can almost feel it coming on. Like I'm not going to be able to say this word, so I'm just going to use a different word in its place that I can get out. Like it's weird,
Yeah.
but I've come up with these little things to do to try and kind of get around it, or even just a pause. If I'm going to say something like right there, I'll stop and I'll go a different way, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it happens all the
Those
time.
are ways you regulate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know when you were
Yeah.
talking, Melinda, it made me think of my own experience when I had PCS, and it would happen all the time. And I would have to do exactly that of pause, take 3 deep breaths. Most of the time, that would help of just one round of 3 deep breaths. But there were a few times, especially, if I'm for me, my PCS was because of a car accident. So if I was on the phone with the insurance company, I would usually need to do about 2 to 3 or even 4 rounds of it to get it out, because conversations weren't always going my way. But so, I mean, depending on what the stress, how stressful the situation is, or what you're trying to do, or if you're trying to rush, I found when I would try to rush things, it would come on more also. So again, I would have to remind myself of like, okay, pause. It's okay to pause and just take a breather. And I don't need to finish everything in 5 seconds. I can take longer. And just changing that mind frame was the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I was also hearing a little bit of like intention and like preparation. So for example,
Mm.
if you're going into a call with an insurance company, can you sit for a few minutes and do a regulation technique, then call? Right. Of course, you can do it while you're on the call and when you realize you're overwhelmed. But if you know this is a problem right now with your PCS, why not start with intention or have that preparation in place? Do a few things that are going to support you while you're feeling this way so that you can go into something feeling a little bit more clearer. So I always talk about that too, right? This sense of like, how can you prepare for hard things with PCS? Is it possible to have a few grounding strategies or breath work that work for you, right? And they're different for everyone. So it takes a little bit of experimentation. We talk about that a lot in the program, to be able to figure out which ones are going to be regulating for you. Have that in your back pocket for when you need it. And if you know you're going into something that's going to, bring on some anxiety, maybe bring forward some of these cognitive dysfunction right now, can you do those things before you even get there? So that takes a little bit of time to figure out what your triggers are. But once you do, that's also a little hidden superpower of like, how can I handle this situation? Just like Dr. Cam, shared with us about how we can handle that stuttering if it does show up or when it's going to show up, pausing, taking a moment to take a breath, thinking of a different word, right? These are all intentional and prepared. I think those are great.
Awesome. I think that's a great spot to wrap up. Maybe if you could leave our listeners with one final thought to consider, what would it be, Melinda?
Don't be so hard on yourself.
I like that.
Take some time. It will come.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to this week's episode of the Concussion Fix podcast. Remember, recovery is possible. You're not alone. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Fix podcast. We hope you found today's episode helpful and that it gave you a little more clarity, hope, and confidence on your road to recovery. Remember, every step you take matters, no matter how small it may seem. If you feel that you could use a little more support on your healing journey, check out the Concussion Fix program. Just visit concussiondoc.io or simply type Concussion Fix into Google and read some of the reviews from people who've already walked this path. With over 3,000 success stories and an average symptom reduction of nearly 50% in just the first few weeks, it might just be the help you need to break through. Thank you again for listening. If you found value in this episode, please share it with someone you think could benefit. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a session. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay curious, and continuously remind yourself that recovery is possible.